Denny Hamlin gets slapped with a penalty for intentionally wrecking Ross Chastain, and Hendrick Motorsports officially appeals their penalty and blames NASCAR for poor communication. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. This week's penalty report's taking absolutely no prisoners. In my first video earlier today, we discussed the huge penalties NASCAR handed Hendrick Motorsports for illegally modifying their hood louvers. It was the largest fine NASCAR's ever handed down in their history. A few hundred points on the line as well. Colleague Racing got slapped with the same penalty. But the list goes on. Denny Hamlin was disciplined for wrecking Ross Chastain at the end of Sunday's Phoenix race. We will talk about that in just a moment, but I do want to follow up on our earlier conversation about Hendrick Motorsports. Hendrick Motorsports has officially filed an appeal. Quick refresher, the number 5, 24, and 48 teams were each docked 100 driver, 100 owner points, 10 playoff points. The number 9 team only lost 100 owner points. They also lost 10 playoff points. And then all 4 Hendrick cars had their crew chiefs suspended for the next 4 weeks and were each fined $100,000. These absolutely season-altering penalties knocked Alex Bowman from first in the regular season standings back to 23rd. Byron and Larson are even further back. Byron loses all 10 playoff points he earned from winning the past 2 races. He keeps the handful of stage wins he's gotten. An absolute nuke of a penalty that all but negates all the early season success Hendrick Motorsports has had. A penalty of this size and weight was not going to go unchallenged by Hendrick Motorsports. They officially filed an appeal earlier this afternoon, and they released a pretty long statement. Let me go and read to you the official statement from Hendrick Motorsports. On Friday at Phoenix Raceway, NASCAR identified louvers on our race cars during a voluntary inspection 35 minutes after the opening of the garage and prior to on-track activity. NASCAR took possession of the parts approximately 4 hours later with no prior communication. The situation had no bearing on Saturday's qualifying session or Sunday's race. We are disappointed with today's decision by NASCAR to issue penalties and have elected to appeal based on a variety of facts that include: 1. Louvers provided to teams through NASCAR's mandated single-source supplier do not match the design submitted by the manufacturer and approved by NASCAR. 2. Documented inconsistent and unclear communication by the sanctioning body specifically related to louvers. And 3. Recent comparable penalties issued by NASCAR have been related to issues discovered during a post-race inspection. For the March 19th NASCAR Cup Series event at Atlanta Motor Speedway, our organization has made the strategic decision not to request deferral of personnel suspensions. Team rosters for this weekend will be updated as soon as substitute crew chiefs are determined. So Hendrick, should they lose this appeal, is going to go ahead and start serving the crew chief suspension part of the penalty. But let's go back to those 3 points, because that is going to be Hendrick Motorsports' argument in, motorsport court. Because remember, their appeal will not be heard by NASCAR. I mean, NASCAR will be in the room because they're going to have their own side of the story that they're going to argue. But it's a separate independent appeals panel made up of motorsport industry veterans that will hear Hendrick's argument, they'll hear NASCAR's argument, and they will decide whether NASCAR's penalty was fair or not. Let's start with that 3rd point. Because the infraction was found prior to qualifying or the race, Hendrick believes the penalty should be less. I think I made the mistake in my video earlier today saying that the Brad Keselowski penalty from last year was also found pre-race. I don't believe that was correct. No, I believe that penalty was in fact discovered at the R&D Center after, I think it was the Atlanta race last spring. So Hendrick may have an argument here that because this penalty was found before the race, and to our knowledge these louvers were not actually used in competition, the penalty should be less than what Keselowski and RFK got, what Front Row got last year, what Stewart-Haas got. I think they maybe have a case there. However, again, the rulebook is pretty vague. It simply says any modification of a single source next-gen part could be subject to a penalty. It doesn't say if we find it pre-race, post-race, at the R&D Center. It doesn't seem to matter. An illegally modified part is an illegally modified part. That's a penalty. But we'll see. Maybe Hendrick Motorsports will have a case there. But those first 2 bullet points kind of go hand in hand, and they echo something Jeff Gordon said this past weekend. Louvers provided to teams through NASCAR's mandated single-source supplier do not match the design submitted by the manufacturer and approved by NASCAR. There has been some chatter that certain parts and pieces, like the hood louvers, that are manufactured by single-source suppliers and then shipped out to all the teams, sometimes they don't meet the proper specs. NASCAR supposedly has a clear process that the teams are supposed to go through whenever that happens. They do have a piece that is not proper. NASCAR obviously believes that Hendrick did not follow that process correctly. However, Hendrick's second bullet point seems to push back against that. Hendrick argues they have documented inconsistent and unclear communication by the sanctioning body specifically related to louvers. Instructions unclear, basically. This is going to be a tough argument to win, but if they do in fact have documentation, have hard evidence that some NASCAR official or officials told them it was okay to alter the hood louvers in the way that they did, then maybe Hendrick Motorsports has a shot at winning this appeal. Maybe. I don't know. I still don't like their chances. Again, the rule is pretty black and white. If you modify a single source part, which it seems pretty clear they did, that's a penalty. If they have documentation from NASCAR saying, hey, it's okay to do what you did, actually, because, I don't know, maybe we're having a hard time getting more replacement parts out to you, whatever. If they have that documented from a proper NASCAR official, a correct NASCAR source, then maybe they've got a shot. Here was the quote from Jeff Gordon this past weekend after Hendrick went on to win the race. Every situation is sort of unique, but this is a more unique one than I've seen in a while, where there's been a lot of communication back and forth on this particular part, especially for this racetrack because they did a parity test in the wind tunnel. I think it really opened up the door for some miscommunication. I don't want to go any further than that. We'll continue to just share all the facts and be transparent with NASCAR as we have been so far. That was Jeff Gordon after Phoenix claiming there'd been perhaps some miscommunication. See, that's also kind of vague. It's hard to say for sure. I'm sure this appeal will be heard sometime in the next couple of weeks if I had to guess, but until then, 100 points per driver per car, 4 race suspensions for the crew chief, obviously the 10 playoff points. Like, this penalty has massive season-long ramifications. It hurts now. It absolutely hurts now, but it's going to continue to hurt this team come October, late in the playoffs, early in the playoffs. This is a huge penalty. I don't blame Hendrick for taking a stand and at least trying to put their argument out there and see if they can get it reduced. It's a steep hill to climb. I think Hendrick's arguing in a lot of gray areas, whereas NASCAR's rule is pretty black and white. We will see who the appeals panel ultimately sides with, but leave a comment down below. Do you think Hendrick Motorsports will win this appeal or not? All right, now let's talk about Denny Hamlin. In the closing laps Sunday at Phoenix, Denny Hamlin ran Ross Chastain, his arch rival, up into the outside wall. They both fell back, finished outside the top 20. On his podcast, Actions Detrimental with Denny Hamlin, Hamlin admitted that he ran Chastain into the wall on purpose, saying that he basically let go of the wheel and just drifted up the track into the wall.
No, it wasn't a mistake.
Okay.
I let the wheel go, and I said he's coming with me.
That admission was very surprising, and it got the attention of NASCAR VP of Competition Elton Sawyer. Today, in addition to all those Hendrick and Colleague penalties we've talked about, Denny Hamlin was also assessed a penalty. He was docked 25 driver points and was fined $50,000. That's the exact same penalty NASCAR handed William Byron last fall for spinning, ironically, Denny Hamlin out under caution at Texas, and then kind of admitting afterwards that he meant to send Hamlin a message. Byron's penalty, for what it's worth, was appealed, and the independent appeals panel rescinded the points penalty but increased the fine. So I'm not sure if Denny Hamlin's going to want to go that same route. Maybe it's early in the year, he'll just eat the 25 points. We'll have to wait and see. This ruling is fairly consistent with NASCAR's recent rulings on intentional wrecks. More specifically, when drivers admit to intentionally spinning out, intentionally spinning someone else's out. This is pretty much in line with previous penalties. Elton Sawyer talked to the media earlier this afternoon, and here's what he said in regards to the Denny Hamlin penalty. "We're delighted that Denny has a podcast. We think that's great." Yeah, I bet you do. "He interacts with the fans, but when you start admitting that you've intentionally done something that would compromise the results of the end of the race, then that rises to the level that we're going to get involved. We've been consistent in the past with that, and we will be consistent going forward." I think two things are true at the same time. Firstly, Denny Hamlin's kind of dumb. He knows the rule. He shouldn't have gone on his podcast and publicly admitted that he took out Chastain on purpose. The move itself on the racetrack I thought was dumb. I've already talked about that, but admitting it was on purpose is probably even dumber. Especially when you know, because you were a part of an incident like this just last fall, that NASCAR will penalize drivers who admit to doing things intentionally. Again, see the William Byron Hamlin incident at Texas last fall. So Denny Hamlin's kind of dumb in this whole thing. He cost his team points on Sunday, and now he's costing his team points on Wednesday. all for a weak attempt at revenge on Ross Chastain. I don't know. It is dumb. But the rule that NASCAR has against intentionally wrecking, I think is also kind of dumb. Like, I understand why NASCAR has a very black and white rule like this. Incidental contact on track that comes from drivers racing aggressively, that's one thing. But when you come out and admit that you just wrecked somebody on purpose with no real regard for your own personal gain or loss, that's not good. We don't want to see that in this sport. And I don't want NASCAR to have to judge if, spinning someone out is the same as running someone up into the wall. They've just said any intentional wreck or incident is subject to a penalty. It is black and white. I do appreciate that. However, NASCAR has made it very clear they do not want to officiate every bit of contact that happens on the racetrack. NASCAR wants to be hands-off. They want to, as they've said in the past, let the drivers police themselves. But if you're going to penalize someone the moment they intentionally exact some, I think, deserved revenge, you're not really letting the drivers police themselves, or you're putting them in a very tight box. I want to highlight this tweet I saw from reporter Jeff Gluck of The Athletic, because while I may not fully agree with it, I think it raises some good points. He tweeted, "So much for drivers self-policing. Don't want to hear anyone claim that's the case again. These guys settled it and called a truce. Apparently, the only way to pay someone back is to make it look like an accident and lie about it. Otherwise, no retaliation allowed now." Yeah, I mean, he's right. It's a little weird. It's weird that Ross Chastain spun Denny Hamlin out at Gateway last year, at Atlanta, at the Clash this year, just cleaned him out all 3 times. But since those were accidents, NASCAR didn't step in. NASCAR's not going to police that, like I said. It is a little weird that Ross Chastain basically got away with all that. Like Jeff Gluck said, the only way to retaliate now is to make it look like an accident, or like hard racing, which is what Denny Hamlin did to Chastain at Pocono last summer. That was racing for the win, no penalty, even though we all know Hamlin ran him wide on purpose. So yeah, NASCAR has put the drivers in a very tight box when it comes to policing themselves. It's really easy to step over the line and get hit with a penalty. I think it's funny that going back to that Pocono race where Hamlin got DQ'd for tape, and now Phoenix, where Hamlin got a 25-point penalty and a $50,000 fine. Both times Hamlin has tried to retaliate against Ross Chastain, he's ended up slapped with penalties. Oh man. Now, that being said, looking at this incident, Denny Hamlin did put NASCAR in a really tough spot. I mean, he goes out publicly and says, yeah, I basically took my hand off the wheel and ran a guy into the fence on purpose. Like, that doesn't look good. NASCAR probably should step in. I'm just convinced that at some point, NASCAR will decide either to start penalizing other forms of contact, even accidental contact, or they'll decide to be even more hands-off. Closer to the boys have at it era from like 10 years ago, whatever it was. Time will tell. I'm not surprised Denny Hamlin got penalized. Again, NASCAR has been consistent. If you admit to doing something on purpose, that's probably a penalty. I was hoping they'd go a little easier on Denny. I was hoping they would forego a points penalty and just give him a fine. To me, intentionally running someone up into the wall during a green flag battle for position inside the top 10 is not the same as William Byron spinning someone out under caution when there could be safety vehicles around and the field is supposed to be frozen at that point. To me, what Hamlin did was not as bad. I would have just given him a $50,000 fine and said that's it. Maybe if he appeals, that's what the result will be. We'll have to wait and see. Let me know down in the comments below. Do you think the penalty is justified? Do you hope NASCAR maybe looks into the rule for intentional wrecking and potentially amends that in the future? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Busy day. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave it a like. And if you're new to the channel and you love NASCAR, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Thank you as always to my very generous Patreon supporters for continuing to help this show grow each and every single month. I'll be live tonight with some of my YouTube friends. We'll be talking about this news. You might hear some different perspectives, some different takes. We'll also be recapping Phoenix, previewing Atlanta. Gonna be a fun time. Hope you stop by 8 p.m. Eastern time right here on this channel. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you again real soon.